Hello and welcome to the 14th edition of Gather, ASU Cares monthly storytelling series, always held on the final Wednesday of every month. I'm Marshall Shore and I am tonight's guest host, and we'll be kicking off the show with unique, true stories about Arizona history that fall in line with May's theme, Fast Friends. Now, I told you my name. I'm also known as the hip historian. I moved here from New York City about 21 years ago and decided to change and trade that snow and cold for something much more unshovelable, shovelable. And so I've been able to explore Arizona's modern history for over a decade, looking at really interesting people, places, and events. And as of about a year ago, started Arizona History Happy Hour every Thursday night at 7 o'clock on Facebook. You can find about all kinds of fun Arizona history. Now, tonight we are broadcasting live from the beautiful historic ASU Care and the marvelous pair of storytellers this month that will share their personal fast friend stories, Dede Cortez and Chantelle Freed. I can't wait to see how our stories might be alike or very different. We'll finish this evening with a casual conversation and Q&A featuring your questions. Please send those in the chat anytime during the show. You help steer the conversation with our guest. Please encourage our storytellers with your positive thoughts, reflections on their stories, as well as applause and emojis and even more in the comments. So I'm going to talk about I'm going to tell you two stories about how friendships can go one of two ways. One, toxic and an unsolved crime that 90 years later still evokes emotion and stories. The other is about how I connected with a comedian piano player whose talents changed the world. Now, I mentioned that I moved here from New York City. What I don't talk about is that I grew up in a small farm town, Indiana, of 25 people. And so, I was always looking for change, and that became true moving to Arizona. Now, as soon as I got here, I kept looking for connections. And at one point, I picked up a book about a woman named Winifred McKinnell. She was born in Oxford, Indiana, which was about 15, 20 minutes away from where I grew up, kind of this whole little network of small farming communities. And actually, when I was going to Purdue, I had one of my college roommates who was from Oxford. Now, Winifred McKinnell, her father was a Methodist minister. And being from one of those tiny towns, I completely understand and glad we both had the same idea to get out. I left through education, but for Winifred, it was the 20s. And she wound up getting a job at the local state mental hospital. And that is where she met Dr. Judd, a handsome, dashing, and I can't say young because he was at least 25 years older than she was. Now, we assume that she was hoping for the life of a doctor's wife. A big house, fancy parties, expensive dresses. What she got was a morphine addict that in so many ways he could hardly support her, let alone even himself. Now, first they headed to Mexico, but the work came further and further apart, and they would often wind up splitting up and going their own ways. One time that happened, and she wound up right here in Phoenix. And she started with a part-time job, and then she went to the Westward Ho, a hotel that still stands in downtown Phoenix, and she went up to the mezzanine level at that point, which was all offices. And the secretary from Mr. Ford thought, she's quiet and mousy. She'll be perfect as kind of the nurse nanny for the Ford family. And so she was a live-in nurse nanny. And one day she's at work, standing on the porch, and she sees a fancy Packard roll in to the house next door. That was Jack Holleran. Now, Jack Holleran had a family with his wife, kids, and he was an A-lister. He had a lumberyard and a Packard. He had everything. And they made eyes, and one thing led to another, and they had lunch at the Westward Ho. Before too long, it was a full-blown affair. Now, at that same time, back in 1931, two young women, Annie and Sammy, they were in Alaska. Sammy was diagnosed with tuberculosis. And like so many folks back then, Arizona was known for not just its dry air, but its clean air. And so these two ladies moved here for Sammy's health. Now, Anne had experience working in hospitals and quickly got a job at the newly opened Grinnell Clinic, which still stands at the corner of 9th Street and McDowell. Ruth, on the other hand, had to use Jack's connections to get a job at the clinic, even though she wasn't really qualified, and that is where Annie and Ruth met. They became fast friends, and the three young ladies decided they should move in together. But Dr. Judd was coming back to town, so they actually rented a house that was a duplex, so they each had a side of the house. And so Annie and Sammy lived on their side, and then Ruth and the doctor lived on their side. Now, they often would have card parties. And, Ruth, as much as she tried to keep the doctor and her boyfriend, Jack Holleran, away from each other, that didn't happen. They actually met and became acquaintances. But the doctor moved on to LA, and that's when things changed a little bit. So Ruth moved in with the two girls into one of the duplexes, and the party started happening. It was prohibition, so booze was illegal to sell, but they somehow always had booze around. Jack would bring business clients over, and everybody always had a great time. Why, in fact, one of those guests brought a radio so that he could have dance parties. Things seemed great until Ruth decided that she needed her own apartment. And even after moving out, she still spent a lot of time with Annie and Sammy. But then there was that fateful evening of October 16th when no one really knows what happened. What we do know is that with those three ladies, there were bullets fired, knives stabbed, and at the end, or when the sun came up, there were two young women who were dead. How it all happened still is a mystery. And if only the story stopped there. Why, the next thing we know, those two ladies wind up in 4 trunks on their way from Phoenix to LA via the train. Now, when those trunks arrived at LA Union Station, they knew something was rather odd. And they quarantined them and said, "Ma'am, you can't have your trunks until we know what's inside." And Ruth said, "My husband has the key," and ran out. You can imagine when the staff opened those trunks and, to their horror, what they found. They assumed it was going to be deer carcass, which was illegal to transport across state lines, but this was so much worse. Ruth was then on the lam, running around the city. By the time she gave herself up, she had a chance to coif her hair, put on a nice new dress, and came out looking all glamorous. And she was brought right back to downtown Phoenix, where she then stood trial. Now, she was found guilty. Not that many believe that she did this all on her own, as she said, but she was found guilty of murder and taken to the state prison down in Florence. As the clock was kicking down to her hanging, she got a bit of a reprieve. She was found guilty, reason insanity. She was then placed at the State Mental Hospital on 24th Street. And if only our story ended there. You see, while she was there, she kept escaping. Why, she escaped 7 times that we know of. Sometimes it was outside the front door and then coming back in. One time she made it all the way out to Mesa to visit a friend of her father's. And he drove her right back to the hospital, which she wasn't too happy about. And one time, she made it all the way to California, and she became a nurse nanny for a family in California and was there for 6 years until there was another murder in town. And as they were going through all the known associates of this person, they discovered a name they didn't know, Marion Lane. And they were able to track that down, and indeed, Marion Lane was Ruth Judd, or who we've now come to know as Winnie Ruth Judd. So she was brought right back here to Arizona, where she was paroled. And then she went back to work for that family. And if only the story stopped there, but we will stop there because there's always more to the story. If you'd like to find out more about the Winnie Ruth Judd story or the Trunk Murderess, there's a few books out there. You can also find on YouTube, there is a vintage marionette movie that was made by my friend Scott in LA. And so you can find those and you can learn more about this story itself. Now, our next story, which is a little bit more, well, I think a lot more uplifting. So, I want to talk about a musician that changed the world. So I first met Rusty Warren when I was in a thrift store flipping through records and came across Songs for Sinners by Rusty Warren, recorded live at the Pomp Room in Phoenix, Arizona. I hadn't heard of Rusty or the Pomp Room, so I immediately ran home and Googled Rusty, and on her website, learned that she had 15 albums to her credit. And several of those had even gone gold. And up in the corner, I noticed a little button that said, "Contact me." So I did. And she was living in Hawaii at the time, so we started having this conversation back and forth via email. It eventually led to phone calls. And then she moved to Southern California. So I was able to go enjoy spending time with Rusty. Now, Rusty's 15 albums she created, she hit it big in the early 60s. She was a classically trained pianist from the East Coast who moved to Arizona in the 50s. And she played in a piano bar, which wasn't much larger than the piano itself. In fact, there actually was a rail on the piano so that people could set their drinks there. And she would just play little ditties as people walked in and banter. But in the early 60s, she created a song called Knockers Up, which was kind of in line with her humor, which was very female-centric and very strong women-oriented. It was all about women, doesn't matter whether they're large or small, hoist them high, hoist them proud. And she was able to travel the country with that song, taking it all over the place. And Rusty, with those 15 albums, she was never played on the radio because she was considered to be too bawdy or naughty. A lot of times, kids would find those Rusty Warren records in the very back of their parents' record collection. And the last time Rusty was on stage was about 1985. And she had migrated to Las Vegas, had been named Entertainer of the Year multiple times in a row. Now, that song, Knockers Up, because she was able to take that across the country, she would show up to play in little tiny towns, and the owner of the bar would basically be on the phone with her manager going, "You booked me this broad? What's going on?" But then they would open up the curtain and see the house was packed. All these women had come to see Rusty, and they brought their husbands who drank. And so she was welcomed back to those organizations and those institutions many a time. Now, one time I was talking with Rusty, and she mentioned that she got to meet one of her icons here in Phoenix, Sophie Tucker. Now, they were both Jewish, and because of that, they could only stay at one hotel in town, which was the Arizona Biltmore. So they had lunch there, and so she got to meet one of her idols. Now, I'm sad to say, Rusty yesterday passed away at the age of 91. So kind of in my own thing, whenever I talk about Rusty, I always talk about how we need a bust of Rusty in downtown Phoenix to commemorate that amazing work she did, because that song, Knockers Up, got her admitted into the Library of Congress as the birth mother of the sexual revolution. And so, Rusty, knockers up to you. All right, now on with our other storytellers. Next up tonight with her personal fast friend story is Chantelle Freed. Chantelle Freed is a professional storyteller and teacher of storytelling. She enjoys utilizing her creativity while helping people learn to tell folk tales, fact-based stories, and personal stories. Chantal lived in Germany with Mario, her husband, before landing in the 100-degree temperatures of blazing Arizona back at the beginning of 2015. She has been involved with the Storytelling Institute at South Mountain Community College and in her community ever since. She teaches a class there called The Art of Storytelling and another course, Multicultural Folk Tales. She helped build the Institute's podcast, I'm Telling, and is active in the Storytelling Institute's On Purpose Storytelling Initiative and has her BA and MA in storytelling from Prescott College. Let's welcome Chantelle Freed.
So thank you for the introduction. Let's take a moment now. Let's take a breath. You still with me? Now let's travel back in time. Let's just go back a little bit. It's 2012. Now, if you start thinking in 2012, do you remember where you were? I do. In fact, I, in 2012, was in Germany, or Deutschland, as they call it, with my husband who was serving in the military at the time. I left everything. I was a native of Colorado. I left everything, my family, a good career, just everything to go be isolated in this little town called Lansbourne. At the time, I didn't see the beauty in it. And what I did look forward to was every Friday my husband would call and say, hey, babes, hey, honey, I'm going to bring home someone. His name is Archer. Okay, Archer, bringing home Archer. See, it wasn't unusual for, the Army guys to bring home their battle buddies so they would drink and have games and eat steaks and grill after they have worked pretty much all week. So I'm like, okay, no problem. The minute I got off the phone, this tornado came running through the house. I was like, what in the heck? It was like Leroy Jenkins. Now, if you don't know who Leroy Jenkins is, let's do a sidebar. Leroy Jenkins is a gamer player in WoW. And if you are a gamer, you'll understand that. But it's a World War Craft game. So Leroy Jenkins, he didn't care about anything. He didn't care about personal space. He didn't care about who was telling him this, who was telling him that. He just came in and he wanted to conquer that room or that spot. And that's what happened. I mean, this guy came in and his name was Archer. And my husband, Archer was cute. I'll give you that. He was cute. Okay? And this guy came in, which was my husband, thinking he's all, hey, babe, how are you? He's thinking he's all sexy, all in his little uniform and stuff. Granted, he was pretty sexy. And his smile, and he's like, and his thought bubble. You could see his thought bubble was like, oh, give me some tonight. Yeah. Well, as a wife, you have that look you give your husband. And my thought bubble was like, what the beep, 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 what the beep, beep, exclamation point, exclamation point. My husband knew that look, and he's like, and his smile kind of went down a little bit, and he stood and prayed rest. And he's like, did you meet Archer? Oh, yeah, I met Archer. You mean the one running around like a tornado, not knowing my personal space? Why is he going upstairs? Can he not wait? Now he's in the kitchen? What? Does he not have any manners? Okay. I had to take a moment and breathe because he came in hot. Like we were best friends and he knew that we were friends. So I'm like, I don't know you at all. Well, my husband, he was pretty happy because that evening of food, games, going outside, playing around, led into a weekend. That weekend led into 2 weeks. That 2 weeks with Archer, a.k.a. Leroy Jenkins, led into a month. And I'm at my wit's end because I don't like Archer. I hate Archer. I want nothing to do with Archer. I had to share my personal space with this person that came in with the person that my husband idolized and loved. No, not at all. So we're still in 2012, and I'm feeling isolated, and I'm in Germany, and I only know my husband. So I'll never forget this. He came the night before, and he sat me down. He goes, honey, we're going to go out in the field, and I don't know when I'm coming back. There's not a time frame. And he knew that I never even ventured outside of the house in this town in Germany. I never at all. No, forget it. No. Like, I didn't speak German. Hardly anyone spoke English. And I was by myself. And he goes, but you got Archer. I hate Archer. I have Archer? I'm like, when are you leaving? He goes, I'm leaving at 5 a.m. And it's like midnight right now. So 5 o'clock came, the door closed. I went and sat on the couch and I was crying. And I was really emotional because I was so alone. However, I really wasn't alone because there was Archer. Archer, no personal bounds, nothing. He just sat there next to me. Now, he knew what was going on because he could see me. He could see, being there so long, he knew what I was dealing with. And he got up. He went to the door. He looked at the door, and he looked at me. I looked at him, and I looked at the door. And it was like this calmness overcame me. And I got up, and I opened the door, and we went outside. Now, I hadn't been outside by myself since I got there. And he was right next to me. And I remember feeling the warmth of that sun on my skin, and I could hear the breeze of the trees as the wind blew, and the smell of that fresh grass that was being cut. And as I opened my eyes, I looked up, and I could see the clouds, oh so gently, just floating by. And Archer, I look at him, and we're not speaking or saying a word, and I can tell he's experiencing that same thing. And at that moment, I didn't mind him so much in my personal space because we didn't talk. We turned back in. A couple days led into me going out to the mailbox with him. Now, mind you, this whole time we never spoke. However, he let me pour my heart out, and he never judged. He just sat there next to me. So the mailbox, a couple days after that, led to going down the street. And then before I knew it, Archer had me walking around the village. And I realized what was going on when I almost tripped because the cobblestone on the village road was rough and uneven. And I only could imagine at that moment the stories that this beautiful village had. But I was so depressed, and I had so much anxiety, and I had so much hate towards myself that I couldn't see the beautiful place that I was in. And we went a little further, and Archer was still by my side. In fact, he was a little closer in my personal space, and I didn't mind so much. And I could hear the cows in the field, and I could hear the rooster. And we kept walking, and you'd look up, and you'd see these tall trees that would reach the sky, almost like Jack and the Beanstalk. And if they could only tell the history of that land and how they got that tall and strong. And walking further, the sweet smell of the German bakery and the baked goods that just made that street so warm and inviting. At that moment, if you could close your eyes and picture the most beautiful place and the most perfect picture, it's just perfect, that you could think in your mind at the moment, that's what it was. That's exactly what it was. And I realized as I was picturing this, and we went back home, for the first time after that walk, I was able to look in a mirror. I was able to look at myself without self-love, self-loathing, hate, depression, what have I done, and being scared. I was able to look at myself with self-love and thinking, I'm almost just as perfect as this town, this beautiful town that my husband brought me to. Back home in Colorado, I didn't roll deep. I didn't roll deep with a huge posse of friends. But I have a ride or die dog. My dog, Archer, A.K. Jenkins. And yes, he is my dog. He's actually my Australian sheepdog. And my husband knew that he was leaving to go out in the field, and he knew I couldn't be alone, that I needed someone. So even though Archer came in fast and furious, it's funny how unconditionally they know that he was what I needed. I needed that friend. I needed that support. So he's with me today. He has the most cutest little teddy bear face. And, we've had, since Germany and landing in Arizona, as what was mentioned earlier, he's been with me. He's my ride or die. And we've had tons of adventures, but that's a totally different time for a different story. So I hope you enjoyed.
So, Chantelle, you talked about kind of that transformation of how you went from being so insular in the house to, with Archer, actually exploring. What was it like then leaving that town and coming back here? It was so cathartic and
Right.
such an emotional experience. What was it like then leaving that place?
It was as if I was a new person coming back, because the old person, when I left the first time, I allowed myself to kind of grieve who I was. So coming back, it was really like fresh eyes and seeing it brand new. However, there was a sadness of actually leaving Germany because of it's so beautiful, and it's such a very different type of community and family and stuff. But in saying that, I've developed a beautiful community and family here.
Because home is where the heart is.
Yes.
So, and then we'll get to more later. But what's one of the things you missed? I loved when you were talking about just that bakery and walking around and that smell. I could smell it. So what did you miss when you left that German town?
Well, we really missed the bakery. The bakery was one thing, and the fresh eggs, because the bakery, they would have these pretzels, and you've never had a pretzel like that. In the bread, they only give you a certain amount of bread because they don't waste and there's no preservatives. So you have to eat what you purchase, otherwise it's a waste. So the bread, but the bagel, I'm telling you, the smell, and I still didn't learn a lot of German, but I'd go back in a heartbeat.
Very good. All right, so next up is Dede Cortez. Dede Cortez is a Latinx marketing strategist and also the owner of Adelante Mami, a storytelling platform for the modern-day Latina. Her mission is to promote and share multi-generational stories to help women keep moving forward. Dede was born and raised right here in Arizona. She has a bachelor's degree in health sciences and a master's in higher and post-secondary education from ASU. She is also a wife, a mom of 2 children, and occasionally an R&B singer. And now, Dede Cortez.
He had me at Sade. I don't know what I would have done without MySpace at the time. And I still wonder if we would have crossed paths at one point or another. But either way, I'm very thankful for the janky MySpace music feature that allowed us to connect. He found a video of me singing on OG YouTube when it had just came out. I was 16 years old singing Por un Amor en La Perla in Old Glendale. And I remember that I was wearing a brown shirt, a fuzzy light pink sweater. It was like a little crop top, and my hair was down and curly. I was super young looking at that video. And I was terrified of singing in public. I still am, singing and talking. But my dad always found a way to put me on the spot and make me do it anyway. And I think that very early on, I learned that the most important things I would ever do would be done with fear to overcome. I'm not exactly sure how he came across this video. I don't know if I had posted it somewhere or if he was just curious enough to look me up and came across it, but he did. And he must have mustered up enough enough courage and energy to look me up and send me a direct message. And it went something along the lines of, I love your voice. I make music. We should make music together. And I figured, why not? I'll just take him up on that offer. And when we first started talking over MySpace through DM, he was very serious, very professional, and once we kind of started talking about, what kind of music we could create, who our influences were, and we kind of stumbled upon the conversation of Sade, which really threw both of us off. And it was very different at the time because we were really young and it wasn't music that was popular at that time. It was something that we actually got from our dads, and we just kind of had this fascination with her and grew a love for that type of music. So, as simple as it may seem and as funny as it may sound, that's really what connected us. And we decided, even though it wasn't really popular or anything mainstream, we would try to recreate that type of style of music together. I still remember the very first time that I met him. My ex-boyfriend took me to his home studio, which was really just a closet in his parents' house that smelled like fresh laundry. And I remember being in that little room, and he was on the outside kind of getting everything set up. It was really quiet, and I'm sure he probably heard me on the mic fidgeting and looking around and being a weirdo smelling his clothes. But what was really awesome was that as we kind of got started and we became a little bit more comfortable, as soon as his hands hit the piano keys, it was like words were flying all around me. It amazed me at how easy it was for us to create with one another. And it just flowed, it came across so organically, and we kind of found a good rhythm between the both of us. And I would say that creating music is kind of like dancing for the first time. In the beginning, it can be a little awkward. You don't really know who's going to start, who's going to lead. You're kind of stepping all over each other's feet. And little by little, you start to just find your rhythm as one, and before you know it, you're all over the dance floor. I would say that we did this dance for about 10 years or so. Our music sessions turned into eating sessions, a lot of eating sessions and breaks in between making music. And those eating sessions turned into family sessions turned into party sessions, and party sessions sometimes turned into crying sessions. And just like that, he became my very best friend. And I think that for us, what was really intimate was the fact that we were both very nerdy, we were very different, and we could fully be ourselves with one another without any kind of pressure. And I feel like he was there for a lot of the hardest seasons of my life, especially being in college, trying to find my way, find my identity. And, we had this vulnerability with each other where he allowed me to be myself, and I think he knew the woman that I was destined to become, and he was kind of just waiting for me to grow into her. And eventually I did. And I think that there's also something very special about a man that can have a very honest friendship with a woman, one without any kind of intention or hidden agenda. And it kind of felt like a little bit in between My Girl, the movie, and My Best Friend's Wedding, just minus all the drama, and there's no sad ending, I promise. But it was just that pure to me to have that connection and, kind of watching those movies and romanticizing that and really enjoying that type of friendship with one another. I would definitely say I am the sassy Scorpio, and he's always been the sensible Sagittarius. He's a very cool, calm, and collected type of guy, and I'm definitely the hippie wild child, so he was definitely the yin to my yang for that. And it seemed as though very suddenly that dance was coming to an end, and I always worried that life would take us in different directions, or we wouldn't be able to be friends forever in that way because, growing up in a very Mexican and traditional household, you don't have male friends. You're either with someone or you're not. That was kind of foreign to my family. And I think that they always knew that secretly, even though he was my friend and very respectful, that he may have been in love with me. And I think maybe I kind of knew too, but I didn't really know what that meant at that time. And without realizing that a new dance was beginning, one day he did get down on one hand and knee, and he asked me to be his friend for a lifetime. So I myself am very thankful for fast and unexpected friendships. And if I do leave you with one thing, I hope that you remember that beautiful things take place in the friend zone.
Thank you, Dede. Now, this is almost like a sitcom. And so I'm kind of wondering, it's like in this decade of friendship, how were your family, your friends, even your husband? It's like I'm envisioning a sitcom where they're all like going, "Oh yeah, no, he's secretly in love with you. He's secretly." So what was the interaction between them in terms of this relationship as it was evolving?
I think that everyone saw what we didn't during that time, and it was very purely just a platonic kind of friendship. And, he was in a relationship. I was previously married with kids, so it never even crossed our minds. And, once life happened and separations happened and divorces happened, it really just made us realize what that friendship could really mean. And, coming out of the friend zone, which is really scary, but, we took that risk and it all worked out in the best. And I think most of my family kind of encouraged it and thought that I was really dumb for not seeing what was very obvious to everybody else.
Well, so I want to invite you to come down here, and so we can have some Q&A with our amazing audience. So now that we've heard all of our stories tonight, we'll move into a discussion and Q&A part of the show. We'll start with a few questions from ASU Care for all of us to answer. Now, if anyone is watching and you have a question for all of our guests or any one particular storyteller, please drop a note or question in the comments, and we can see them from here. This is a great opportunity to get to know our storytellers a bit better, and we'd love to hear from you. All right, so Chantal, how has working with the theme of fast friends, how did you decide on telling your story?
Well, good question, because I had some other ones to go, but I wanted to do something where, an animal always seems to know and have this nonchalant attitude that they're going to love you or take you as you are. And they're going to come in hot as fast as a friend, right? Mm-hmm. The majority of the time. So I wanted to do something where it honored a pet or it honored an animal that we love or that volunteers. Because sometimes we can't ask them, you want to be friends? You want to go volunteer? You want to go be a guard dog? You want to go be a police dog? So I just wanted to pay tribute to that because they do come in hot and fast and just love unconditionally.
Indeed. And Dede, same question for you. How did you arrive at the story that you told us? I'm sure there were other stories. Did you have any challenges in deciding which story to tell?
Yeah, I was kind of thinking fast friends in terms of, people that come and go, in and out of your life. And, my family had always told me, be friends with someone first. So it was really hard for me to really gain that concept, I guess. And when I thought about fast friends, that was the quickest and easiest friendship I've ever had in my life. So it was kind of easy.
Very good. And, and I think for myself, I think my initial reaction was to tell an Arizona story. And so that's why I immediately went to the When You're with Judd, because it was all about this toxic relationship. And sometimes we've all had those fast friends that go by the Y side, but it's rather a horrible process, as opposed to here where it actually turned out to be a positive process. And so, and then Rusty Warren passing away, I could also talk about, my partner Paul and I have been together almost 28 years, and it was basically from a phone call that lasted for 3 hours and went on. So, that was the fun, I think, of tonight, of just kind of figure out, okay, which story do I want to tell? There are so many options. All right. So, Dede, tell us a little bit about your storytelling experience and the role that has played in your life up to now.
Yeah, well, this is actually my first live storytelling experience.
Oh my gosh, congratulations.
Thank you. My storytelling experience is a little bit different. So as you mentioned, I did do music back in the day. I still write occasionally, but it started out as poems and then it turned into writing music. So it's usually in the form of voice and not just, kind of reciting it in this way, but it's awesome.
Indeed. All right. So I see we have a question from Colleen. So for both of you, what advice would you give to storytellers in sharing their stories?
I'll go. I think in order to share a story, you have to be comfortable with it, and it has to be the right time to tell it. So if you're not feeling safe when you're telling it, it's just not that right venue it's just not the right time to share it. And be open and honest when you're telling the story, and it can be fluid. I always like to say that a story is like a living entity, because 20 years ago, I was a different person than I am now, so my story is going to have a different visual to it and different words to it. So it's okay that it grows with you.
Well, as we were talking earlier, that it's like, from day to day, it's like the story will evolve and be
Yes.
different from day. It's never going to be the exact same
No.
story.
No, it's not.
And so, Dede, what prompted you to start Adelante Mami?
I was really inspired by all of the women in my family, and I thought it was really important to share multi-generational stories and really keep a lot of those stories going forward, because there were so many conversations with my great-grandma or family members that we don't have anymore. It's just all based off of memory. So it was a way for me to kind of keep that going, and also for us to learn from one another. There's a lot of differences between generations, but this was a way for us to kind of come together and heal and continue building and have a future for our kids.
And I think that intergenerational is such an important aspect, because there's so many divides between generations, be it technology or language, but just sitting down listening to each other can just be so amazing in getting to understand. You might be saying the same thing, but in completely different ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
About some of those same challenges that people are facing right now versus what they were facing 50, 60 years ago. So let's see. So Chantelle, did you ever try teaching Archer any German?
He knows 9, which means no. When I was saying Leroy Jenkins, I was being very truthful. So he came in like a whirlwind, and he's aged a little bit now, so he's a little bit more calmer, unless it comes to food. So just 9.
So wow, so you didn't have any input into the dog? It just kind of showed up at your doorstep?
My husband has had all the input.
Wow.
He's the one that he knew that I was in the depression and having a hard time, and he knew he was leaving, and so him and his Murphy, his army buddy, his battle buddy, they went and got Archer. So yeah. So, but I love him. I want to change it.
So Dede, in sharing your story, how did your approach change as kind of like you were practicing it, telling it, and kind of re-going those moments? What change did you make to the story?
I think that I really just tried to focus more so on our relationship and kind of how it evolved. And there was a lot that I kind of left out of how we got to that point, but I figured it would be, let's just skip to the good part and leave that for another time.
So, and something we were talking about earlier is the fact that, so thoughts on virtual performance versus live performance. I mean, as we're kind of in this virtual world at the moment, but at some point that may or may not be the case.
Right.
So what do you see are kind of the changes that you can anticipate?
Well, I'm hoping with the live audience, you get that synergy, because you have the teller, the story, the audience, and their energy. So coming together, it's the synergy of everyone. And you'll be able to, like we were talking earlier, you can read your audience, because maybe you're going down one way with your story, and either your audience is looking at you like they're scared you're going to hurt yourself, or, what the beep is she talking about? So then you
I like
can,
the beep.
right? I self-censored myself. So you can redirect your story to pull more people in, so which is nice. And also, though, I think with the pandemic, it became, we had a normal world, right? Like the hero's journey, and then it goes upside down, and then it becomes, that upside down world becomes our new world. So we have to add back in live performances, because right now our normal world is this. It's enjoying this type of internet synergy and questions, right?
Well, I know for me, I'm looking forward to a time we can do hybrid. Because I think some of the great things about the virtual aspect is the fact that somebody could be joining us from Germany.
Right.
And so it's like you don't have to be here. And also the fact that this is recorded, you can enjoy it at another time when maybe there's a sports team doing something that you want to see.
A dance competition.
Yeah.
A dance competition. I mean, right, exactly. There's so many different things that could be happening.
Exactly.
So, Let's see, and then we have another question. Oh, so especially I think with your story, you kind of got into this a little bit, but how would the other members of your family tell the same story?
Oh my gosh, I'm sure they would tell you that I was so dumb and that we probably liked each other the entire time. And in Spanish, they say, me gusta la mala vida, which means like you enjoyed the bad life. So I could have had that a lot sooner if I was a little bit wiser, faster, but we arrived and that's all that matters. But it's been really cool for my family to kind of watch it. And it's almost for my grandparents or my grandma especially, like, I told you so kind of moment.
They know, don't they?
Yeah, they know.
They
It's
know.
so funny.
Well, and then I think also, I mean, all of our stories, there were personal elements of that. Where do you draw that line between how personal do you want to go in terms of a storytelling thing like
Well,
this?
this is my first time, so I'm not sure how personal I should go. But I'm very open and transparent, and I think it just depends on your comfort level and like what details of that story are really important to get that message across.
And I think for me, I mean, our voice is a powerful tool. And once it's out there, especially now that it's being recorded, you have a responsibility to uphold what you say and have that integrity. So if you don't want something out there, you don't include it in your story. That goes back to being secure and self-aware of what you are sharing, So I think you have to evaluate what you want to say. What is really the meat of the story?
Right, and I think that also is like kind of that live performance where you can almost be shocking, but in this environment, you don't necessarily want to be shocking. It's just kind of like, okay, I'm not going to go down that path because it's a little bit too much, and I don't want people in the grocery store going, oh, by the way, I heard. And it's like, oh my, yes you did, and crap, I should never have said.
What did I
Right, exactly, I shouldn't have said that. Let's see. Oh, and here's one for me. How do you think Rusty would say about these wonderful female voices? She would say knockers up. I have no doubt. I mean, that's what I loved about Rusty. Until the very end, she was a comedian. Having people around her laughing, she was always herself. And that was one of the things, I mean, she was such a strong female from the 50s to be able to make it in a music industry that wouldn't even accept her because she was too bawdy. She never played on the radio. And so she was always about supporting women.
That's awesome.
So that's why I was like, I think tonight is the perfect moment.
Yes.
Because,
I agree.
I mean, so I think we should all do a knockers up. Knockers up.
Knockers up.
Knockers up.
And if you want, you can actually go on, I know she's on Spotify, YouTube. It's like over the last day, there's been all different variations that people are posting about some of her stuff. I mean, Rusty was just an amazing person, and I miss going. I would meet her in Palm Springs, and she would ask for a tongue sandwich, no onion, just mustard. Not what I would enjoy, but that's what she wanted, and who am I to say no? Let's see. All right. So, Chantelle,
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about your experience with storytelling, especially now teaching. How has that changed kind of how you tell stories?
Well, there's a little bit of pressure, right? Because if you have students watching you tell, or you're in class telling a story, and you're teaching them the tools, I always say I'm giving you tools for your toolbox, and you miss something, they'll call you out on it. So but it's all good. It's all good because then we always do positive affirmations where they'll tell me what I do right. They'll tell me, ask me questions so I know what I miss in a story. So, we're all storytellers. Like you were saying, the grandparents, the sitting down at camp or campfires, stuff like that. So we're just honing in on this talent, I hope I'm better. I hope I'm still natural at it. I don't know.
Yes, very natural.
What do you think of yourself as a traditional storyteller?
I think I would love to keep doing it and practice more and get comfortable telling my stories. And I appreciate you even helping me over there and just letting me know. It's my story, so how can you go wrong when it's your own story?
Exactly, you can't. It is your story to tell, and that's it.
You'll be going home tonight and you're like, dang, I should have said this.
Yes, of
Let
course.
me do this for you again, honey.
But you can do that next time.
Yes, I would love to.
Because no one will be like, oh, she didn't tell that in the story last time I heard it.
No one knows but you.
That's true.
Right, and it's never going to be the same story twice.
That's very true.
So, Chantelle, with you teaching folk tales, how do you find some of your students kind of reacting to things either from their culture or not from their culture?
It's eye-opening because, I mean, a simple thing like Star Wars. Star Wars is such a traditional hero's journey from Joseph Campbell, where that is so old school, but, the traditional green-eyed high school student coming into college, taking a class, they're like, what? There's real structure to it? What are you talking about? And they they'll start to learn that maybe there's a Native American story you can't tell because you don't have the rights to tell it. You have to ask permission, or you're not the person to tell that story. So they learn respect, because if I wanted to tell your story, I'd have to ask you. And if you said no, I don't tell it. Because it's not my story to tell, but if I'd like to refer to it, I still need your permission. So they learn respect, they learn that their grandparents actually had something to say, and they like the aspects of learning the meaning of like a Cinderella, the damsel in distress, and the different, all those different meanings.
Well, and that brings up even a good point with Disney versus the original Grimm.
Yes.
I mean, very different stories.
Yes, well, Grimm's very adult.
But a lot of times it was told to not just adults, but it was also kids were
Correct.
involved in that, and
Correct.
they're kind of like, wow.
Yeah, you start doing some of your research on certain authors, and it goes down a deep, dark sexual path.
Indeed.
So,
Dede, your story had somewhat of an unexpected end. So you were talking about how kind of the music brought you two together. Are you still recording with him?
Every now and then, yeah. He's still an audio engineer. He's more in the media field now, so he does videography and photography, but we work very closely together. So now I'm in marketing as well, and it's all the same thing. It all kind of flows. So from music to poems to storytelling and video and putting those stories together. So it's really cool that we still get to work together.
So say someone wanted to listen to some of your recordings.
Oh
Is there a way they could track those down?
We actually recorded a song for our wedding. So our first dance was a song that we made together. So it's on Apple Music under Dede Cortez. Yeah. We couldn't agree on a song. We were so annoyed trying to find the right one. And we were like, you know what? Let's just make it ourselves. And then we did.
Nice.
So you did a lyrical story.
Yeah, the lyrical one.
Nice.
So, and maybe next time there could even be some music kind of in the background to kind of set
Yeah.
the mood. I mean, I know you made me feel old when you were like, oh, Sade. It's like, oh, that's like old music. Nobody listens to that. And I'm like, didn't she just do a new album? I was like, it's not that.
Not when I was 21. My friends were listening to Drake, and we were listening to like older music. So it was really cool.
Dust off those copies of the vinyl. Come on.
Right, it's like,
The vinyl's like so retroly cool now.
indeed,
Yeah.
I know. It's like outselling other mediums now.
Yep. They
Because
like that
vinyl is hot. That retro vinyl.
They like that edgy, rougher sound.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's just, and it's a different way to explore things. I mean, it's like there are now record stores where they keep adding things as opposed to kind of almost dwindling down.
Yeah.
So I love the fact
Right.
that there's so many different ways to explore music. From, as we're talking, CDs that sometimes we don't even know what to do with anymore. Versus a cassette, which
Yeah.
is just trendy because they're cassettes. I mean, growing up with a car, not even a cassette player, but we had the 8-track adapter. So you could play
Right.
cassettes in the
That's funny.
8-track. I know, I'm dating myself there, but that's okay. So what words of advice do you have when we're looking at moving forward into kind of this post-pandemic or the new normal? What do you see? I mean, especially with your storytelling and marketing, because, they're really the same.
Yeah.
That's all you're trying to do is tell a story to a target audience.
Yeah, I think it's really important just to be yourself and be authentic and find different ways and finding what works best for you. Maybe doing it live is a little bit too much, but starting somewhere, it could be a podcast or writing a blog, any kind of way of sharing your story that feels comfortable for you, even coming out of the pandemic. And then once we do have more in-person events, you can kind of build up that confidence to do it.
Very
Well,
good.
and now with the pandemic and everyone jumping in, as far as the internet, there's a lot of research you can do online to look at TikTok or, what's the other one, like
Well,
Facebook.
because TikTok in a way is storytelling.
Yeah, it
it's
is.
just,
It's a 2-minute pitch,
yeah.
and so you have to know your beginning, your middle, and end, or your beginning and middle, and draw them in to see what the end is, like you wanted to do with your story.
Right.
So research is important to do that if you want to continue on to, really amp up your internet world and family. So I'm working on that, trying to figure out how to do that because one thing we had to do is because I went from teaching in person to the pandemic hitting to having both of my classes go online. So I had to recreate my syllabus
Right.
and how to draw someone in telling a story. It had to be online. It had to be audio or it had to be visual. So I started out with just an audio story, so you start to learn how to really listen to the words that you decide to choose, and does it have a greater impact? So when you only hear your story, you're allowing the listener to create their own visuals.
Right.
So we started out like that.
So yeah, and actually bring up a good point. I mean, not even just virtual like this, but also with things like TikTok. There's a local group that has created something called Local Buzz that is really great because it's really kind of hitting marginalized communities and giving them a voice. It's really low tech, so there's no editing you can do.
Right.
You can only go from your phone to the finished product.
Yeah.
And so unlike TikTok where you can take 6 hours to edit this 2-minute
Right.
thing, because that's what scares me when I look at it. I'm like, there's no way I'm going to do that.
A little
I already know
overwhelming.
that. But
you
yeah,
could learn that skill.
I don't want. I have other priorities, and that is not one of them.
Okay.
And so I have too many things to do in my day than learn to spend 6 hours editing 2 minutes. So it might get me lots of press. I'm actually working, doing it. We're looking to do an Instagram. I've got a friend who does historic buildings.
Yeah.
And then telling the story. And so we want to do one downtown talking about the building that Psycho was used,
Oh, wow.
Oh,
that they used in Psycho. People think it's the Westward Ho,
Right.
but it's actually a little hotel that still stands downtown that's no longer a hotel. It was supposed to become a condo complex, which it's not. But it's like, let's talk about that.
Right.
And the fact that we have all this amazing history around us, all you've got to do is ask the question.
Very true. To learn their
So
story.
yeah, so that's what I think a lot of storytelling is just asking a question, looking at things from a different angle, and getting a new take on it. Like, oh, wait a minute. So that's half the fun.
True. Yeah, I agree.
And I know for myself, I am an auditory learner or a verbal learner. So it's like I can think of the question all day, but until I ask it, I don't realize I know the answer. And I think that's one thing storytelling does as well.
Yeah.
Is helps inform us all
yeah.
in just a different way. All right. So thanks for taking this time to hang out with us for Gather, this month's listening and chatting with our excellent Arizona storytellers. This has been a pleasure being tonight's guest host and sharing stories with you. We appreciate Dede Cortez. Yay!
Thank you, guys.
And Chantelle Freed.
We're a high
and of
team
course,
today.
our wonderful audience here at Gather supporting us, as well as Gather series and all of our stories that were told tonight.
Send the love, send the love.
Indeed. And so we'll see you next month. The next monthly Gather event will be Wednesday, June 30th at 6:30. These shows are always on the last Wednesday of the month. It's going to be another awesome show, and the theme is What Almost Was.
Ooh.
I know, dun, dun, dun. ASU Cares next live stream is tomorrow at 7 p.m. with Ion Bonjourni and Sutopa Baru. They'll be performing an amazing Indian classical music with a tabla and vocals on the Beams live music series. We hope you'll tune in from wherever you may be and get to know this gorgeous music and the artist behind it. Watch all of these live stream events just as you've done this evening on ASU Cares YouTube, Facebook Live, or Twitch. We recommend that you subscribe to ASU Cares YouTube channel so you'll never miss a show.
Never.
Indeed. ASU Care is a self-sustaining venue that has been presenting free live stream arts programming since April 2020. The venue made it a top priority to create paid performance opportunities for Arizona musicians and artists when gigs were in short supply, and keep the healing of the arts flowing into their audiences' lives. ASU Care receives no funding from the university or the state and has no income for over a year and needs your help to reopen its doors. If you're able to do so, we hope you'll stop by ASU KERR, ASUcare.com on your way off your device tonight and click on the gold Give Now button to donate to ASU Care. You'll be helping sustain the arts, artist, and one-of-a-kind historic venue, and ensuring that it can connect communities to the magic art of online and in-person for decades to come. Thanks again for watching and have an amazing night.